Good evening, everybody. It's good to see you on this Wednesday evening. Good to see some of our students making their way back. Eli and Taylor, good to see you guys. Good to see you. This is Ecclesiastes, so if you were here Sunday, you know that. And, hey, Lynn. And the only other option really is a parenting class and a church history class, which is in the house over there. So not too late if you want to change. That's all good. That's all good. You can do that. I encouraged us all to try to read Ecclesiastes at least once a week or so to try to get through that. Anybody have a chance of? Prefer not. Test. 1, 2. 1, 2. Yeah, sounds on. Okay, turn it. Is that good? All right. So, we suggest everybody try to read Ecclesiastes and just get the book in. I don't know how many of you had a chance to do that, at least get partway through it. Anybody have a chance to at least do something, read a little bit extra? That's great. That's great. And if you got very far, you'll realize, probably already, that it can be a little herky-jerky in how it sort of talks about this, then it talks about this, but you'll see phrases that keep coming up, sort of cycles around, which is interesting. It makes it a little hard to outline if you're the type of person who likes a nice linear progression of logical argument. That's not this book. One of my colleagues over at the college popped in my office yesterday, and I said, yeah, I just started teaching Ecclesiastes. And he said, I hate Ecclesiastes. He said, I just finished teaching that to a teen group where he worships. He said, that book is just, what do you do with this thing? and that's what he explained. It's just sort of all over, and he's a scientist. And when you're a scientist, you kind of like things in spreadsheets and tables. And that's not Ecclesiastes. You can't spreadsheet. Yeah, engineers, yeah. Bill might be able to put Ecclesiastes in a spreadsheet. He's pretty good at spreadsheets. He just might be able to force this thing in, but that's not how it reads. But it asks the big questions. So we talked Sunday that it's an example of wisdom literature, which is a common type of literature in ancient cultures. All ancient cultures have them. Not that they're all the same, right, but it fits that model of literature, just like we have different genres of literature in our day. But it's not just any wisdom literature. It surpassed those of the nations of the East and Egypt, which were the big powers of the day and the ancient civilizations of that area of the world. And it surpassed all the wise men of Israel's own history, and they named them in 1 Kings 4. Let me just use this one for... Just use the podium? All right. Hard to be tethered to a podium, but, I'll do it. Do I? It has wheels. It does. It does have wheels. And so, even as a subset of wisdom literature, it was, what's the sort of overall mood often in Ecclesiastes? It's wisdom literature, but with underneath that a broad umbrella. It's in a smaller category. Remember? It is wisdom, but it's pessimism. It's a pessimistic view, largely. Not entirely. We're going to make sure we see that tonight. It doesn't only get good at the end. Fear God and keep his commandments. That's not the only bright light in it, but there is a lot of pessimism in it. We mentioned the speaker is the preacher, or Koheleth. I think it's Solomon. I think that makes the most sense. And so we see references to the preacher throughout the book. So we've seen that. We talked about some key words. There's many. I use these three because it just framed the first class well. Vanity, and everything is vain. Right? It's all worthless, meaningless, empty. And the paradigm for that is looking at things under the sun. And that's really important. There is no value. There's nothing of any value, even life itself, under the sun. Until those moments where God enters the picture, and then that changes everything. God changes everything. So, not that I'm giving away the book, there's a lot of other things in it, but that's sort of the key paradigm there. All right, so it is pessimistic, but not entirely pessimistic. So you notice multiple times in the book, chapter 3 and 5 and 7 and 8, the phrase fear God comes up in some significant way. So God doesn't appear only in chapter 12. God is all over this book. Good things are a gift. They're a gift from God, and you see that in chapters 2 and 5 and 8 and 9, that God will judge us for what we do. That comes up repeatedly. Again, chapters 3 and 8, 11 and 12. And that God is concerned and reviews presently my choices right now, my lifestyle right now. That's a common theme in this book. So it's not just, hey, at the end, God's going to judge you for what you did in your life to be sure it's right. That is a very important lesson. But that God reacts to my life right now in the right now. And so you see that kind of idea come up again in chapters 3 and 5 and 8 and 11 and 12. So God's all over this book. And that's important for us to remember, that it's not just pessimistic. There are very good things in it, and certainly God is all over it. It's not just something we find there at the very end when he says, fear God and keep his commandments. All right. We mentioned it is difficult, of course, to outline, to give it some structure to it. A possible structure, if it helps, there are 3 times in the book where the writer, the preacher, stops and says, look, there's nothing better than to eat, drink, be merry, enjoy your life. These are God's gifts. So some people try to frame some structure around that. He does it at the end of chapter 2, again, near the end of chapter 5, and kind of in the middle-ish late of chapter 8. Maybe there's some structure to that. I don't know. But for people who like structure, that may give you something to hold on to. Right? Maybe chapters 1 and 2 are leading up to that point, possibly. Some try to make that suggestion. And chapters 3 and 4 and 5 all lead up to that point again. And then chapters 6, 7, and 8 lead up to the same point again. And maybe that's what's part of what's going on. And then it ends in the grand conclusion. So the rest of chapter 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 all lead up to that big conclusion that you know well at the end of the book. When it's all said and done, here's what it boils down to. So maybe there's some structure to that. And if you like structure, there you go. That might help you a little bit. All right, let's go to chapter 1. Let's just read it to refresh it. It's not long. And we're just going to talk about it then and how this goes through. So, book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 1. We'll just read these 18 verses together. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit has a man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun? One generation passes away, and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. The sun also rises, and the sun goes down, and hastens to the place where it arose. The wind goes toward the south, and turns around to the north. The wind whirls about continually and comes again on its circuit. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place from which the rivers come, there they return again. All things are full of labor. Man cannot express it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. That which has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which it may be said, see, this is new? It has already been in ancient times before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of things that are to come by those who will come after. I, the preacher, was king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I set my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven. This burdensome task God has given to the sons of man, by which they may be exercised. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and indeed all is vanity and grasping for the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight. What is lacking cannot be numbered. I communed with my heart, saying, look, I have attained greatness and have gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. My heart has understood great wisdom and knowledge. And I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is grasping for the wind. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. All right, there's the end of chapter 1. So it sets up the big questions of this book here in this chapter. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. What profit has a man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun? That's the big question. Who cares? Right. Who cares of all the stuff I'm doing? And then he eventually moves into a whole series of things that he's tried. He's attempted to find meaning. Wisdom is the first, and we read a little bit about that today. So that's the big question of the book. And so he begins by making this statement, and it's an interesting statement. One generation passes away, another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. Okay, what's the point? What's the point of that statement? And the follow-up continues in the next verses. Yeah, Bill. Oh, we got runners. I forgot. We got a mic. Thanks, Willie. What's the point of that statement? Because I think it's an important one.
That we are more temporary and transitory than the elements around us. We feel, we breathe, we think, but we will perish far faster than even the dirt under our feet.
Yeah, that's right. So what does that imply then? I think that's exactly the point. Right? We are so obviously finite. So what's the point? He says the sun isn't, right? The sun keeps going, the moon, the rivers, the wind, all that stuff is the same sun that was around millennia ago, and if the earth continues, it'll be the same sun millennia from now. The same wind. The Mississippi is going to still be running, presumably, up here, Willie. So where is he going with that? What does that take us? Yeah.
No matter how many generations we run this experiment, we're going to get the same outcome.
Okay.
That is, if you factor God out of the equation,
Right.
it's always going to end in vanity. Well, today, nihilism, depression, meaninglessness. Yeah, you factor God out, you get the same dependable result. And you're on a treadmill, hate to tell you.
Yeah.
And the sun's on a treadmill, and the wind's on a treadmill. Those things aren't free either. You're on a treadmill.
Mm-hmm. And it's a really short one. Yeah, really short, right, comparatively. In Scripture, where does humanity place in creation? Where, Bill? At the top. Right? What are the words? What does Genesis tell us about creation and humanity? What's the charge given in Genesis 1? Have dominion and subdue it. Right? That's where humanity is placed. The writer of this book looks at the world and says, who has dominion? Not us. That's the perspective. Right? Look at the statement, right? One generation passes away, another generation comes. It's the earth that abides. It's the earth that stays. I have dominion over the rivers. I have dominion over the wind or the sun. You kidding me? It's been here for thousands of years and will be here for as long as this little place continues to run. Me, I'm here, I live, and I'm gone in a relative moment in the span of creation. That's the perspective. Right? We are finite. So if we look to nature to try to get our meaning for being a human in nature, where are we going to end up? In a psychology word. That's possible. Literally, that's possible. Yeah. Well, that you do. We're getting there in just a minute. She said, a tree hugger. Well, if you become what we call a tree hugger, and I'm a biologist, by the way, just remember this, so I like living things. Right? But we'll get to that idea in just a minute. You can go so far in that direction. Well, let's just go there. All right, so you go as, I'm a biologist. I love nature. I love animals. I kind of like plants. They're important. But I was technically a zoology major, not a biology major, because I didn't want to take botany. So I was like, I don't like the plants. So zoology it is. But they're important. But when they become the pinnacle of what Earth is, what happens to humanity? We lose value. And we see that right now in culture. Right? We see it right now. The significance of being a human lessens the more we put significance on what is around us. Frankly, what's going to endure a lot longer than we will. You guys seen the sequoias in California? Have you seen the sequoias in California? Is it not humbling in a way to see those things? The Grand Canyon? Anybody seen that? Yeah, I've never seen it. Saw the sequoias, right? Yeah, right. You saw a tree that was here when Christ was. Yeah. It's incredible, and it's humbling. So what happens is if that's where we try to find meaning, is in nature, we quickly, and there's a good humility in that, by the way, but there is a wrong humility in that because it's false. It's the false kind of humility, where I esteem nature above other things, and the value of humanity declines and declines and declines until we are so enamored with nature that the meaning of human being is, well, there's too many of us trying to promote abortion to keep the population low in ecologically sensitive areas of the world. Are we there? We're absolutely there, right? We're funding it, right? Funding that. Because we need to get humans out of the way. So that's where this goes, and that's why it's important. So one of the things he points to at the very beginning, this point is relevant to right now. It's not just the world is meaningless. No, it has meaning. My decision on this has meaning on how I view you, and how you view me, and how we view the value of other people on this planet. And it begins with this idea, all right, well, a generation comes, another passes away. What does it mean to be a human being? It's the earth that abides. That's what's important. Well, that's going to take us a lot of really bad, dark places eventually. Not only in my own mind, but culturally, and civilizations end up there. And that's where this book starts, is there's that observation. And it's a good observation to make. It's an important observation to make, because we have to address that. All right, someone with a thought on that idea, or that concept? Yes, right up here, Willie. Eric has a thought. Thank you, sir.
So I think he kind of touches on this a little bit as well when you look at the generation, but the earth abides forever. The point is, why gather all these things? Why do all this work? Why do I put these trees and gardens and all that? Because it's going to outlast me, and who knows where it's going to next. And so it's a striving after a wind. That kind of concept of, why am I doing all this and gathering? It's just going to the next generation.
Yeah, good. That's right. Good connection. All right, so he illustrates that. What is with the sun and the rivers and the wind and all that. And he gets this conclusion in verse 8, where he says, all things, this is the New King James, all things are full of labor, man cannot express it. The eye's not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. If you could put that in your own words, what would you say? How would you say that? What's his conclusion there in verse 8? In the U version. Your neighbor comes to you and says, I'm reading this weird book. What's this verse mean? You would say, well, this is my best take on it. And you would say,
Nothing here can fill you up.
all right.
You will always be thirsty and still left hungry, no matter how much money you have.
Okay, good. Nothing here can fill you up. You're always going to be left thirsty, hungry, no matter what.
Experience that you ever do out there, and you go like, I can die now, I'm good.
Right.
You do it, they go like, it's like all the ladies have put so much effort into the Christmas dinner, and 20 minutes later, it's consumed. An hour and a half later, the grandkids are going like,
Yeah. Is that, I'm spoken from experience by chance? Yeah, no, it doesn't last. Right, it doesn't last. Yeah, that's a good way to summarize it, I think. This view wears you out. You think about this long enough, and it wears you down. Right? It grinds you mentally and emotionally. I don't even want to talk about it. It's beyond words. And there's certainly no satisfaction in it. The eye can't be filled up. The ear can never be filled up. There's just no satisfaction in this. And it just grinds you down mentally and psychologically and socially and spiritually to have that kind of view. So it's the wrong view is the point. It's not how you're supposed to view things. But in this moment in the conversation, that's how it's presenting the world. Right? It's not supposed to view it that way, but we can. All right, so he asked this next major question. I think this is the next slide. Yeah. That which has been is what will be. Is there anything of which it may be said, see, this is new? And of course, the answer to that is no. It's versions of the same thing. There's nothing novel about any of it. My life is not nearly as unique or special as I might like it to think it is, from just a perspective of living on the world. That's not where uniqueness or meaning comes from, is I'm going to do something really astounding and special. I'm not. What I've done has been done millions of times before. And it'll be done millions of times after me, and by people who probably did it better. That's just the way it is. Success in business, success in academics, success in family, success in athletics, whatever. It's all been done before. So that's not where my meaning comes from. In fact, you reflect on that and you realize there's no significance to that at all. Lots of rich people have built fancy stuff. We'll get into that probably next week, perhaps. Anybody seen the Biltmore? Impressive. Impressive. Where's the guy who built that? Not the Biltmore anymore. Not there anymore. I think he died when he was early 50s. Got appendicitis. Right? All the money to do all of that, killed by a bunch of little bitty microbes. Little bitty bacteria. They get in you. Yeah, up here, Willie. Got a comment up here. So this whole idea of see what's new, and we'll talk about this.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
Could one of his ideas be addressing people go like, okay, but that's the past. But we're modern men, we have the internet, we have cell phones, we have technology. Thus, all these things you said about the past don't apply to us because we're modern people. And it seems like maybe because I think we live in a time, and probably every generation has, where they feel, okay, the biblical word is not relevant to us because this is a new era. And I think Solomon's coming back and saying, false.
Mm-hmm. I think
it's
so.
not as new as you think.
Yeah, and there's a great word in this in verse 10. How does verse 10 help us answer that question? That's a good question. That we might say, look, we're a lot more advanced than they were. What's the key perspective or the word in verse 10 that Solomon uses to address that question, I think? Yes, read it in your version. What's it say? Is that the ESV?
Yeah, it has been already done in the ages before us.
In ages before us. New King James uses the word in the ancient times. So when Solomon wrote, compared to 2,000 years before him, where were they technologically? Ka-ching, right? Advanced, new, fresh. Right? And he could say, look, there is nothing new here that hasn't been in ancient time. This is old stuff. That's right. So I can look at what we were now, maybe 2,900 years or so after Solomon. And yeah, the world's completely different. Completely different world. Solomon wouldn't know what to do when he walked in this world. Right? But actually pretty soon he would. Because it's just people doing the same stuff. It's governments acting the same way. It's work that requires the same things to be successful. People trying to cheat employers the same way they've always cheated employers. Right? That's all the same. Tom?
Mark was saying something about becoming slaves. Mm-hmm. And you think about the advanced technology that we have today. Think about what happens if the power grid goes down.
Yeah.
How connected are we to everything? Or in other words, we're so connected electronically. If the power grid goes down, we are paralyzed.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so
in a moment.
As technologically advanced as we're becoming more slaves.
That's exactly
more like
right.
slaves.
And that's a great perspective, isn't it? It doesn't take much to absolutely cripple us. And we've seen that in Florida a time or two, right? All you need is a good old hurricane to come in and knock out a few things, and suddenly you realize that living on an island means you're on an island. And if that bridge gets washed out, you're on an island. You're on your own. I remember reading an article after 9/11 that the reality, of course, is the Twin Towers were sitting on what? Manhattan Island. I mean, that thing's, you only get there one way, multiple ways, but that's it. Take away bridges and tunnels and you're stuck. And that's a pretty fragile, exposed place to be, actually. And all it takes is a little knock of reality to show we're pretty fragile people. And so he says there's nothing new. And you can go back to the ancients, and what we're dealing with today is the same thing. Different forms, different words, but it's all the same thing. And so, in verse 11, there is no remembrance of those former things, nor will there be any remembrance of things that are to come by those who will come after. How many of you can name one, some of you can do this, I'm sure, of your great-great-grandparents? Jade can, Marilyn can, Robbie can. Okay, it's a few. Great-greats. Any great-great-greats? Jay, you must be one of those genealogy people. Okay, well, there you go. There you go. There you go. The fact is, most gravestones in most cemeteries don't have any flowers on them. They're too old to have flowers on them. People just don't remember. And they get busy, and life moves forward. And that's just reality. That's just the truth. I might think people are going to remember me, but the truth is they won't. For a handful of people will remember me for a little while, and that's it. And my great-great-grandchildren will have no idea, probably, who I am. Does that bother us a little bit? Why does this point matter to us? Why does it matter? Because I think it does matter to a lot of us. It matters to me in some ways. I want to be remembered. Why does it matter? Yeah, Jade. Let's get a mic to you there, Jade.
It kind of makes, whoa, goodness, sorry.
It's Jade, turn it down.
I know how to hold a microphone properly. It kind of reminds me of like Cain and Abel and how Cain wanted God to recognize him, and when he didn't, he acted out and killed his brother. And that kind of just continues to happen throughout the ages, is that we always want to be known, and then when we're not, we do these horrible things, or we do everything to try to be known. Like Rockefeller, he wasn't that great of a guy, but he gave a lot of money to a lot of people, and now we know who he is. Or some other philanthropists, or some people that we don't think are that good, like Osama bin Laden or whatever. Like, they do these horrible things, and yet we remember them because they did horrible things.
Right. So why do people want to be remembered? Why?
I think it brings it back to your point. If you take God out of anything, your life really has no significance. And being remembered, you're like, well, at least people remembered me for whatever, so my life had some meaning. Yeah. But if you take that away, your life doesn't really feel significant.
I'm no psychologist, but I think that's it. I think we see that in Ecclesiastes. And you said it right, Deborah, that our meaning, our significance lies in nothing under the sun. It lies in that I am united with God through Jesus Christ. And that gives me meaning. And that gives my life meaning. And that's why what I'm doing has been done millions of times before. Nobody's going to remember what I do here anyway. It doesn't mean it's meaningless. That's going to ripple into future generations. What I do will ripple. What gives it meaning is that it's done in the name of Jesus Christ, and that my value is in him. That's why I'm valuable. And that's why you're valuable. And that's why your life matters, because God made you. That's why life matters, not because there's biology going on. It's because God made you, and God's image is within us. That's why we matter. So I think that's right. And if that's not really solid, then one way to find my life matters is people remember me, because I did something worth remembering. My life had some purpose to it, so that down the line, somebody knows, Todd did this, and my granddad or whatever did this thing, which was good. And that's what he's after there, I think. So another search for meaning. But the reality is, we're just not going to be remembered. Nobody's going to know who we are. And even if we do things that are really, in some ways, special or creative or noteworthy, people aren't going to remember it. Anybody know who won the Super Bowl 4 years ago, 2018? Anybody? Super Bowl 2018? Didn't think so. It's a big deal, right? Who cares? Right? Nobody remembers. 4 years ago. Nobody knows the Super Bowl. The most watched sports event on the planet. Well, at least the most lucrative. I don't know if it's the most watched. There's a lot of soccer fans in this world. But I think it's over 1 billion people watch the Super Bowl. It was the Eagles, in case you're wondering. Philadelphia Eagles won that 4 years ago. Yeah, whatever. So, who cares? Anybody know who won Best Actor last year, 2022? You probably remember this one. That was Will Smith. Yeah, that was a memorable night. But you don't remember it because he won Best Actor. That's not why you remember it. Remember it for something else. Momentous. All right, so let's go to the next little jump here. He moves sort of from this prologue, and we'll try to get this next verse. We will get this next verse here in the next 15 minutes. This prologue, and he shifts into this now first-person introduction. I, the preacher. And he starts searching for wisdom. So there in verse 13. And I set my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven. This burdensome task God has given to the sons of man by which they may be exercised. All right, so he starts committing himself to wisdom. Interestingly, he says, God gave us this task. And later in this book, I think it's just chapter 2, I think he mentions this. No, it's chapter 3. He mentions about this task again, I think. Yep, chapter 3 and verse 10. I have seen the God-given task with which the sons of men are to be occupied. So here he mentions it in chapter 1. God has given us this task. Search out by wisdom. I'm searching this out. And he gets back to this idea of task again later on. God wants us to observe and to consider and to think, he says. And we do. That's just built into us. Humans think and they consider and they reflect. Only perhaps the most passive mentally just sort of float through life without ever really giving serious thought to serious things. But it is built within us. There's something beyond me. We have that in Ecclesiastes, right? God has put it in the heart. Eternity in our heart. There's a thing in there. And God has set us to this task. What's significant when you're 20? 20. Okay, 20. Yeah, what's significant when you're 20? Right? Well, 20-year-olds think about that, I think. 18? 19. Okay, I was close, Addy. 19. All right, what's significance about? As when you're 39? Something like that? Yeah, good. 39. That's what I thought. And so he gives us this task. And so he thought about it. And what did he come up with? When he says, I set my heart for wisdom, and what did he come up with? This burdensome task. Verse 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. What did he come up with? Yeah. That wasn't worth it. It's all vanity. Right. All that effort and wisdom was not worth it. The way he puts it now, framed under the sun. He will praise wisdom later in this book. Wisdom is a very good thing. This is the man who said wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom. That's in Proverbs 4:17 or 7:14, something like that. It's one of those. I don't remember. It's in there somewhere. So it's in 4? Oh. So he says, I've seen it all. All is vanity. So he desires some sense of gain by all of that. And he doesn't find any. Some sense of purpose for that. And he doesn't find any. Instead, complete emptiness. And notice how complete this is, right? I have seen, verse 14, all the works that are done under the sun. And how much of them are vanity? Is vanity? Get my verb tense right? I've seen all the works, and all is vanity. Right? It's all worthless. That's what he came up with. And so in verse 15, what's crooked can't be made straight, and what's lacking cannot be numbered. What's the point of that verse?
There's a lot of confusion in life and unanswered questions, and that can cause a lot of perplexing questions that come up, a lot of confusion with those questions not being answered.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We can think and think and think, and by the time we're done, we have all these kinds of paths we've meandered down and rabbit trails we can chase, and by the time we come back, we've pretzels shaped our way around things, and at the end, we didn't arrive. We didn't find what we hoped we could find. I took a course, comment right up here, and then I'll tell you about this little course I took last year, which was interesting.
You know, it's almost like he's given us his qualifications.
Yeah.
He said, I gave my all to this task.
Right.
And I'm smart. I studied it, and I had unlimited resources. And I think that's why the writer of the book is so important, is that the least limited of all men who ever lived, mere men, and he comes back empty-handed.
Yep.
Man, that should tell you something. And it's also, I think, the realization of the more I looked, the more corruption I saw. Mm-hmm. Even in my own administration, I could not root out the bureaucracy and the corruption. Right. I couldn't fix everything, even when I was the king. And man, the more you know, the more pain. And I think there's something important there. He looked into the abyss, and the abyss looked back. And I think if God never shows up in the book, you go nuts.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you would end up in a really dark place, right? The only thing that saves us, of course, is God from that. Yeah, that's right. That's right. I took a course in philosophy last year because I don't know philosophy at all. And I wanted to learn a little more of it because all the biggest questions in science get back to philosophy. And I can learn all the nuts and bolts of little technical stuff I want to. I've learned a lot of that stuff and forgotten more than I've learned right on the way. But the big questions come down to big questions, big philosophical questions. So they describe in this intro sort of course, graduate course of philosophy, that you're joining the great conversation. If you've ever heard that phrase before in academics, the great conversation. It's like you're pulling a chair up to the table in the middle of a conversation, and you start listening to what other people are saying. And you listen by reading what people have written. And so we read stuff by Thomas Aquinas and a little bit of Aristotle and some Plato and a bunch of other people. Complicated stuff, some of it. Really smart people. Some of them just, I don't know if they're smart, they're just wordy after a while. But at the end, they've been discussing the same questions for millennia. Millennia. I mean, Plato is sort of seen as the originator of modern Western philosophy. And Socrates never wrote anything. Anything we know about Socrates, Plato, who was his student, wrote us about him. So that's sort of the basis of all Western philosophy. And the same questions he's asking then, you know what we're asking now? The same questions. And so they've been pursuing all these meandering intellectual paths for millennia, and no one knows an answer. People come down on different ideas here and here, but there is no answer. And of course, the big thing missing in a great many of those is what Ecclesiastes contains, which is God in it, which gives us the only thing stable. So when he says, look, what's crooked can't be made straight. I mean, that's demonstrable, I'm sure, in his day, and it's demonstrable in our day. Just look at if you're looking for it in learning, you're not going to find it. You have 2,900 years since Solomon wrote this, 23 or 400, whatever years since Plato wrote, of meandering writings, all looking. I mean, interesting ideas and some good ideas, but meandering, and they don't get you where you're going. And so he says in verse 16, I communed with my heart. What does that mean? That's the New King James version. I communed with my heart. What's he doing in communing with his heart? Yeah, he's thinking deeply. What'd you say? Oh, digging. Yeah, he's digging deep in himself. You guys ever do that? Spend some real time in self-reflection about things. I communed with my heart, mulling this over, saying, look, I've attained greatness. I've gained more wisdom than all who are before me in Jerusalem. My heart has understood great wisdom and knowledge. And not only did he pursue wisdom, but in verse 17, what else did he pursue? Madness and folly. He looked at all of it. Right. What does wisdom give you? Okay, what does folly give you? What does madness give you? And they all got him to the same interesting point, vanity. All of those, as different as they are, they got him to the same point, which is vanity. Now, the very next chapter, I said, he's going to say there's a big difference in the fool and the wise. So don't think wisdom doesn't matter. It does. But it's not going to get you the answer that he's looking for. And that's because in verse 18, and much wisdom is much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Do I think I will find ultimate significance in academic learning? No, we will not. And if we try to look for it there, it'll wreck us. It'll wreck us emotionally or psychologically, and certainly culturally. It'll absolutely wreck you. The mess that our culture is going in is driven foremost by academics at the leading academic institutions in our culture, in our country, which are the leading academic institutions of the world. Many of them are here. And it's driving what so many look at and think that is so outside of obvious objective reality. How can we be pushing that way? It's because it leads you there. When you take God out of the picture, it's where you end up. So wisdom has value, but it can't give the answer to the question here. What profit has a man from all his labor? That's how this started in verse 3. What profit has a man from all his labor? Wisdom doesn't answer that question. You need something more than that. Wisdom doesn't answer that. learning is essential. In fact, Romans 12, how are we transformed as Christians? We are transformed by the renewing of your mind. How is it that we obtain all things that pertain to life and godliness? 1 Peter, 2 Peter? 2 Peter chapter 1, we obtain all things that pertain to life and godliness through the knowledge of Jesus Christ. Yes, ma'am. The knowledge of Jesus Christ. We have to learn. We have to learn. And it is the mind of Christ that Paul encourages to have the mind of Christ. That means we learn him and we learn to think like him and understand him. And that's where significance comes from. So here in chapter 1, we haven't gotten there yet, right? It's looking in other places and posing the great question there in verse 3. What profit is a man from all his labor? And so what he's shown us is, well, you look just at nature and how we compare to nature, that's meaningless. That's not going to give us anything. You look to search out wisdom and intellectual understanding, and that's going to lead you down. It's just going to make your life miserable and full of grief because there's just nothing there ultimately at the end. So it's not that kind of knowledge, and it's not that understanding of nature, but there's a great deal to learn actually from nature that steers us in the right direction. There's a great deal to learn in knowledge that gives us the right direction, and more of this book will sort of help play some of that out. Ma'am? Yes, Romans 1 feeds into that idea. All right, a comment here too. We have a couple of minutes, 3 or 4 minutes here before we close. Any comments or questions here at the end? Up here again. Excuse me.
It's almost like he's saying I guess Jesus said, love God with all your heart. That's the greatest command. Seek first the kingdom. If you don't figure out what's the highest value, you have no way of gauging any value after that. And I think, therefore, everything's vain. But once you plug God into the ultimate good or good one, then all of a sudden you know where to put everybody else,
Right.
including yourself.
That's right.
And nature,
Yep.
and academic pursuits.
Right.
But if you pursue that first, you're just scattered.
Yeah, that's right. And that's exactly the right perspective. And Ecclesiastes will show that out as we go through. So here at the beginning, he set the stage really well. Our lives are not as meaningful as you might like to think they are, just on their own. The impression we leave will not last nearly as long as maybe we think or would like it to last, though don't underestimate how much one generation ripples into the next generations. But they won't know that I'm the one who did it, maybe, right? Good or bad, they'll just know that there's this rippling effect. So there's got to be meaning in something bigger than that. And so Solomon pursued it. He pursued it in wisdom, but then chapter 2 takes us into a whole number of other things. And do you teach next week? Yeah. So Bill's going to take us through that. And so he'll just talk about things he pursued in chapter 2. I pursued this, and I pursued this, and I pursued this. And you'll see this continuing theme of all these things we try. And there's nothing new. Humans are trying them now too. And we fall prey to them too, I think, pretty easily. Looking for meaning or substance or importance in things that are not going to be it. Solomon tried them all. And so as you prepare for next Wednesday, I think that's the next slide. I was going to go through a couple discussion questions, but we'll leave it at that. There you go. As you prepare for next Wednesday, anticipate that. You know where we came from? So we're leading in here to chapter 2. If you need a book, there are some more books on this back table. Some more came in, so grab one here, maybe between class and then coming in, at least on your way out the door. And you'll have the discussion, the questions to follow. So I forgot I had those questions. We'll get to those maybe next time I teach, or others like them. All right, thank you very much.